chair this session. So we have two presenters in this session. First one is Yoshimi Orii from Yale University, and second one is Stuart from Harvard University. So first, please start your talk.
Yes, thank you. Before beginning, I would like to show my cordial gratitude to Hiro-san and Nejime-sensei for offering me this good opportunity. Please add the subtitle, Look at Historical Ties to my main title. As time is very limited, so let's start. The word globalization, fashionable in recent years, has an affinity with the early history of the Jesuits, which made this word exactly a globe in the early modern period. Moreover, comprehensive projects related to the history of the Jesuits are becoming more and more popular, especially in Japan. In fact, besides this project of JARS, a couple of projects related to the history of the Jesuits have been funded by the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science in the last few years. A similar trend is seen globally. Brill recently launched the Journal of Jesuit Studies. Overall, not only studies on Jesuit astronomy, philosophy, or science and their global dissemination, but also studies on Jesuit organization and education, or on information technology as a means of transmission are becoming very noteworthy. And my belief is that in studying the trajectory of globalization of Jesuit knowledge and technology indeed requires focusing on their impact on indigenous cultures. And today, in this conference, in which Japanese history researchers and European history researchers based in Japan and globally are gathered in a very exquisite balance, I will present the local impact of some Christian books that the Jesuits in Japan selected, translated, and printed with the European printing press. These books were read, played the role of preaching scenario, summarized, transcribed, memorized in the time of persecution after the priests who guided them were expelled, and survived as oral traditions. My presentation will argue two main points. The first is that there can be seen a faithful transmission of the preaching reform of the Catholic Reformation in the mission field of the Far East. On the other hand, there was an evolved spontaneity of faith among Japanese believers. I would like to explain these points through a textual analysis of those both consistency and differences which lay between European original texts, Christian books printed in Japan, and manuscript transcribed by clandestine Japanese believers. Before beginning, I would mention that this presentation is not a comparative study between East and West of the history of the preaching or reading, no more simply a unidirectional history from one culture to another. I will rather analyze empirically the very point of contact through the contents and the physical characteristics of those documents. Although it might be somewhat redundant for some of you, please let me recall a key point of the 16th century religious history in Europe, because we are from very different disciplines and very different research areas. It was a century when the relation between society and documents was changing by the dissemination of the printing technology, and when the Protestant reformers thought that they could remedy the depravity of the Roman Church by returning to the original meaning of the Bible. Against Lutheran Reformation that established that the Bible was the only standard of faith, the Council of Trent a standard of faith, the Council of Trent affirmed the importance of the Bible alongside the Church's accumulated dogma. In other words, tradition was to remain important. By the decree of April 1546, the Church accepted, quote, the unwritten traditions which, received by the apostles from the mouth of Christ himself, or from apostles themselves, the Holy Ghost dictated, have come down even to us, transmitted as it were from hand to hand. It was against this situation that the Council set a high value on the oral transmission and the relationships that people have in communities. Now, what was the attitude of the Church toward texts? The Council of Trent not only confirmed the legitimacy of the Vulgate Bible, but also compiled official catechisms, the Missal and breviaries, and tried to reconstruct the uniformity of the Church. It also advocated that these texts should be used correctly by clergymen who teach and guide laymen rightly. In other words, the Church intended to make and emphasize a clear distinction between clergymen and laymen. Juan Luis Vives, a contemporary humanist, referred to clergymen at the time, quote, incompetent, without experience in life, but still devoid of common sense, completely unaware of nature of human emotions and how to move them. They do not know what words nor what kind of prayer are to be applied to what kind of issues. Therefore, first of all, the Church strove to educate clergymen so they could educate laymen. The Tridentine Catechism, compiled by Charles Borromeo, the Cardinal of Milan, and published in 1566, clearly focused only on clergymen, not on laymen, as the title Ad Parrochos shows. Well, actually, I came across these two striking works in National Museum of Vienna several years ago. And the position of clergyman, which occupies the middle in the vertical line between the divine and secular, clearly shows the intermediate characteristic of clergymen. One of the consequences of the Reformation of clergymen was the publication of many preaching scripts that they used in their dioceses. And those books formed a noteworthy genre in publication at that time. At the same time, many manuals that teach how to read those scripts in practice were also published. Here, we can observe the attitude of the Church toward Renaissance humanism. In terms of preaching, Luke the Evangelist or Paul the Apostle regarded the guide of the Holy Spirit as more important than rhetoric, that is a human art. But being exposed to the threat of experimental science, the Church agreed to the potential of the principle of the traditional tribute, that is grammar, rhetoric, and dialectic. So because of the time, I have to skip this script. And let me move on. I have recorded in Europe's history and emphasized the distance between clergymen and laymen. We can now understand more clearly how it was incompatible and too unique for European standard to employ dojuku or dojiko, that is, the system in which lay Japanese believers live together with clergymen and take auxiliary works such as preaching or translating. Also, at the time of persecution that completely banished all priests in 1644, it is naturally impossible to maintain the vertical relationship between the religious and the secular. We can here assume a sort of spontaneous or willing faith among Japanese believers, but it is accompanied with methodological difficulties to empirically show content or extent of their faith. In order to deal with this situation, I would like to show empirically or documentarily the phase of acceptance by Japanese believers. First, let's see the historical manuscript. This is a report written by Juan de los Angeles Urreda, a missionary of the Order of Saint Dominic, addressed to the provincial in Manila, which informs of 3 Japanese martyrs who died on the 21st of November of 1614. By this letter, we can know that these believers who played a leading role in their community were transcribing by hand devotional books, including the lives of saints. I quote, "In Juan in particular, I saw in him a fear of God, and his conscience was more religious than secular, great zeal for the honor of God. And so, when he was in conversation with others who were Christians, he only talked about the things of God as if he were a preacher. He was a friend of devotional books. And so, when he reached to gain any money, he was already very poor, he bought not gifts for himself, but papers, and transcribed lives of saints and devout things. When he was on his way, he carried a book." Reference to this, the practice of taking notes is what Valignano officially advocated. The regulation of the province, compiled by him in 1592, includes the regulation of brothers preachers, a reglas dos irmãos pregadores, in which he dictated that the preachers should make notes for sermon and the way to do so in detail. So I quote, "It will make a good use for preachers to have a binder in which to write the principle of the Gospels throughout the year, leaving each Gospel 1 or more blank sheets where they will be writing the points that they hear or read relevant to such Gospel, and another binder of commonplaces, virtues, and vices, leaving for every virtue or vice a blank sheet or sheets in order to take notes during the year of what they would read or hear relevant to such virtue or vice." Here, please pay attention that preachers should select any part of text which each speaker thinks it is important, depending on his understandings, like some paragraphs of the Gospels or moral teachings, rather than simple transcription. I think this means that they should get into context. In other words, spontaneous and autonomous understanding of the texts or sermons were undergone. Now, let us ask, did Japanese believers really and properly practice this? The existence of some Christian manuscripts by clandestine believers clearly shows that the answer is yes. A recent article by Dr. Samchek Malgojapa refers to this, which I think it is fascinating. She points out that there are some blank pages in a notebook bound in Japanese style and commonly known as Kirishitan Shomono, which was found at a private house in Takatsuki, Osaka in the 1920s. The so-called Barretto manuscript has the same characteristic. This manuscript was compiled by Manuel Barretto, Jesuit missionary who reached Japan with 4 Japanese tension ambassadors in 1590, including Hara Martino. It includes the oldest abridged version of the Gospels in Japanese, and it was found at the Vatican Library in 1940, together with a Latin version of the Compendium written by Pedro Gomes. This bound document leaves one seat or sheets in blank after some breaks of Gospels or Lives of Saints. Another example is the so-called List of the Feast Days of the Saints. This bound manuscript in the form of small handy book, yokocho in Japanese, consisting of 21 folios, but with the last 17 folios blank. This manuscript is one of the confiscated religious items from clandestine believers. The existence of this document was confirmed at Mito domain in 1800. Now, can we regard the aforementioned advocation or recommendations of Barignano as his own idea? The answer is no. It is not his invention. It is what the European preaching reform advocated. Luis de Granada, the famous preacher and author of Christian books in the Iberian Peninsula, proposed almost the same thing in his preaching manual. I quote, "The second and very necessary thing is that preparing in advance a notebook with titles of all things that are usually matters of the sermons, but put on their places what have been found, and in this way also make note of many things which belong to the gospel that the church reads on Sundays and festive days, what have been heard from other persons, or what one happens to seek to make note in some notebook briefly, in order that when he has opportunity, he can write it in the respective place of his notebook or folder." This was composed for preachers or priests. On the other hand, in the case of Japan, lay believers like Dojuku are known to have participated in preaching, as I already mentioned. As it has high credibility that these documents were compiled as believers' notebook, here we can point out the inheritance of Catholic Reformation or Renaissance humanism, and the example of its development or transformation in the remote mission field. Well, let's move on. When we trace the historical ties from printing text to written text, there is an example of the development or transformation. The famous book, Spiritual Shugyo, Spiritual Exercises, published in Japanese with Roman characters by the Jesuit Mission Press in Japan in 1607. The third part, out of 3 parts, titled Somana no Kannen, Meditation of the Week, was compiled by Pedro Gomes, as the text clearly says. This part was transcribed, and a transcription was found in 1800 at Mito, same as the aforementioned document. Dr. Izuru Shimura, a Japanese linguist and philologist in the first half of the 20th century, introduced this manuscript for the first time to the academics under the title Shichika Kannen Shō, a book of meditation of the 7 sins. And Dr. Arimichi Bisawa transcribed it and found the consistency, that is, there are same contexts in these 2 texts. The former, the book Spiritual Shugyo, writes about the meditation of every Friday, as you can see here. The first obstacle is, in general, to understand that there are 2 obligations in church man. The one is to avoid deep sins as normal Christian too. The other is to avoid and hate deeply whatever fault as monks do. Because a churchman who avoids serious mistakes and does not avoid light ones cannot be called a good churchman, even if he could be called a good Christian. Therefore, the true obligation which corresponds to monks is to try to rectify firstly one of the faults, and then gradually have it. On the other hand, there are some interesting changes in some place of Shichika Kanensho, like this. So, but I have to skip because of the time. But please pay attention that comparing these two texts, the word churchman and monk in the printed text are downgraded to Christian in the manuscript, and the Christian in the former are downgraded to man in general. In other words, what Gomes regarded as obligations for churchmen became obligations for normal Christian. I think this means that the stratum of Japanese lay believers were longing for more high-level morality than Europe. And that is all I have to say. So as a conclusion, I hope to have demonstrated in these 2 points proposed in my introduction. And as closing, after Dr. Ebisawa is passing, the intellectual history study on Kirishita manuscripts stagnated, apart from some studies by Japanese language scholars. For example, it has not yet been clarified the editing process of the 3rd part of Spiritual Shugyo by Pedro Gomes, or that of the Barretto manuscript from its European source. Besides, even the transliterations of all manuscripts that I mentioned today have not yet been completed. By researching these texts as a space-time continuum, they could become an important series of documents for intellectual history studies. That is all I have to say.